Thank you guys so much for your patience. We're going to start in just a second. Thank you. I mean, well, yes. Can I borrow a spot of this thing? What? Can I borrow a spot of that?
Please, by all means.
Thanks.
I never come unprepared.
No, well, Texas probably wouldn't think I did either. Okay.
If you need any lip gloss.
Yes, napkins are perfect.
Oh.
That's perfect.
Where is Brian from? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Colorado, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense. You seem like Colorado.
that's good.
Good evening, even though the sun's still out, which is the best part about spring. I'm John. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem, or Vice Mayor if you don't speak Latin, for the city of West Hollywood. It's really a joy and an honor to be here. I'm going to do our land acknowledgement real quick and then say a couple of words and then hand it over to this amazing panel, which are going to be here tonight. So the City of West Hollywood acknowledges that the land on which we gather, that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood, is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Gabrielino Kizh peoples. When this event started to be in fruition, I had a really special call with my friend Dawn. Dawn and I have known each other since we met in this very room many years ago. I'm not that old, but when I met Dawn, I knew I met someone really special, and you're gonna see that tonight. And I'm really jealous that you kind of, if you don't know Dawn, get to experience that for the first time, but as well as the amazing panelists that she has for you. Dawn is someone that's changed my life. She was the person that kicked me off when I was doing something crazy and that was running for public office. She served as the MC, and she was like, really, you're doing this? And I couldn't have thought about anyone, but that's because Dawn brings a sparkle to everything she does. And tonight's topic is something that is deeply passionate to me. I know deeply passionate to Dawn, as well as our other panelists. But when I think about my dear friend and that spark, she brings it to even a topic that could scare so many people away. And you shine a light on so many things and so many people, and your beautiful son Waylon is just the best light in this entire world. So I'm really excited that you gave us a little bit of time on your Tuesday to be here, to hear this amazing panel, and to learn and to find out how you too can be active champions to ending this epidemic and to ensuring that we can do all that we can as individuals, as organizations, as cities, to ensure that this crusade against child abuse that we need to end together starts here and starts tomorrow with everything that you do. So that's all I'm going to say, because I'm a crier, so I can't really talk about Dawn in any other way, because I'll start crying, and my friends that are in the building know that I cry quite easily. But I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists tonight, and then I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, the one and only Dawn McCoy. So one of our first panelists, Jonathan Hatami, is a 17-year veteran prosecutor at the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Hatami is currently assigned to the Complex Child Abuse Unit as a senior trial attorney. He has handled thousands of child, physical, and sexual abuse cases and has prosecuted over 70 felony jury trials, including the 4-month trial and torture and the murder of Gabriel Fernandez. He is featured in the 6-part Netflix true crime documentary, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, which was released in 2020. And that leads me to one of my other panelists. Brian Knappenberger is an Emmy-nominated, award-winning director of docuseries, and the series including Turning Point, 9/11 and the War on Terror, Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press, and The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. His film, The Internet's Own Boy, the story of Aaron Schwartz, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It won a WGA Award for Best Documentary Screenplay and was shortlisted by the Academy Motion of Picture Arts and Sciences. His recent film, Church and the Fourth Estate, was nominated for an Emmy, and he runs the Los Angeles-based production company Luminant Media. Welcome. We next have Bethel Cope Vega, who holds the distinction of being the sole child abuser prosecutor in Orange County. Okay, so that tells you all you need to know. Her cases include abusive head trauma in infants, torture, and a recent spike in casualties of fentanyl. It is her honor to fight for the most vulnerable of victims. Prior to graduating in law school in 2009, she taught high school in Compton, California for 5 years. When one of her students was shot and killed, she witnessed both the grief and the weariness his murder brought. She was inspired to work relentlessly toward accountability for those who break the law, integrity by those who enforce it, and justice for all victims. Bethel was recently elected to the board of the Association for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity in her office. She loves mentoring young people interested in law, playing with her ever-growing children, and she recently learned how to ride a motorcycle. And in Los Angeles and Orange County, you are braver than many, many people. Your people terrify me when I'm going to work on the 101, so thank you. And last but certainly not least is someone that is just the baddest of all badasses, and that's Dawn McCoy. Dawn McCoy is a TV host, actor, writer, and heads her namesake media company. The mother of a child abuse, traumatic brain injury survivor, she is also the founder of Loving Way, a child abuse prevention and awareness organization named in honor of her son, Waylon. Dawn proudly serves on the board of Holton's Heroes, an organization that supports pediatric traumatic brain injury survivors and their families. And now I'm going to turn it over to the one, the only, my dear friend, Dawn McCoy.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have this on? I turn it on, don't I? Did I? Is it on? Oh, great. Wow. Sounds so natural. Okay, let me bring it this way. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight, and thank you to our panelists. This is such a horrible, horrible topic, and I wish I wasn't here more than anything in the world. I wish I wasn't here talking about this with these heroes. But when I knew we were going to do this panel, when John approached me about it, and I was so honored, I immediately knew who I wanted, and I got my dream panel, because these are the people that have influenced me and have changed my life and the way that I look at child abuse and the way that I look at the system and what's working, what's broken, and what we can do to move forward. So thank you again for being here. And you know, we know this is a really painful topic, and there are a million other places you could be and might rather be tonight. It certainly would be happier, and it wouldn't hurt your heart as much, but we're really happy you're here, and we're so grateful that just by all of us being here tonight, we can affect change and take steps towards stopping child abuse, and that's why we're here. There are going to be discussions and details shared tonight that will make you uncomfortable, and photos of child abuse that will be really hard to look at. Photos that will actually break your heart, but we want you to be uncomfortable. We want our society to be uncomfortable with child abuse so our horror can create more effective prevention, reporting, and justice. You may want to look away, you may want to leave the room, but we want you to know that today we are here to talk about what child abuse really, really looks like. If the photos are too traumatizing for you to see, please feel free to step outside or look away and take care of yourself. We understand, we really do, because this is hard, and it's hard for us all to look at sometimes ourselves, most of the time ourselves, and you fight through it. But we on this panel can't look away, because we either live or work with the constant, pervasive, lasting effects of child abuse, and that's why we're here. If you have any past history with abuse or need to share a report about current abuse you're aware of, please know that we're all here around to talk afterwards and share resources with you. You can also call 1-800-4-CHILD. I hope everyone puts that in their phone. I actually was told by someone recently that was working at my house that they had just called on someone who was beating their child, and he was wearing a little Spider-Man outfit. And she said, I reported it. And I said, you're so young. I love that you know the number to report it. So please make sure it's in your phone and tell your children and your friends how to do that. But tonight is about experiences and solutions, and our experts have so much to share. So what we can do, all we can do as a society to do better. But let's start with why I'm here. John talked about it a little bit. I'm going to break it down a little bit more. The reason I'm here moderating this panel of our everyday heroes is that my son, Waylon, was the victim of a severe traumatic brain injury as the direct result of child abuse when he was 6 weeks old. While the criminal justice system takes care of how it happened, all of my energy is focused on Waylon's healing, progress, and joy, and on doing my best to make sure this never happens to another baby or child ever again. Child abuse kills, it maims, it disfigures, it disables, it causes the victims and their families not to trust society or the world the way before. It has broken our trust completely in so many ways. And to be perfectly honest, it breaks your heart every day. Because you can only imagine what your child would have been if they hadn't been hurt, if they hadn't been killed. My son, who is 3 years old now, and is just the best human being I've ever known on this entire planet, not even biased because I'm his parent. People say this when they meet him all the time. He lives with, as a direct result of brain injury, he has brain damage of approximately 75% of his brain. There's water on the brain, fluid, instead of where brain should be. I have to read this just because it gets a little emotional. Cerebral palsy, epilepsy, blindness caused by cortical vision impairment, and severe developmental delays of both a physical and cognitive nature. That doesn't mean we don't have joy. We have lots of joy, and everyone that knows us knows how we live in our joy. We have lots of joy in our house and lives, but I would be lying if I didn't say that I don't feel heartbroken every day, that I'll never get to see what Waylon might have been and who he might have been if he had not been hurt by a monster among us. To me, they are monsters. I don't know if these guys can say that, but I do not consider abusers human to me. They are monsters. So, these individuals here today fight the monsters, and I am so grateful for them. And the only way we can move forward is to let them do their job, share it on media, and really tell the story of what our children go through and what we as families go through, and fight them. They build cases, they prosecute them, and then they continue to advocate for our children every day, even after the cases end. So let's get going on everything you guys have to share. So we can get a clear idea of who you guys are and what you do. What kind of cases do you prosecute versus what cases are not in your caseload? I'll let Jonathan go.
Good evening. So I've been a prosecutor for a little over 17 years. For the majority of my career, I've handled cases of vulnerable victims. So domestic violence, child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, adult sexual abuse, elder abuse, and hate crimes. And so I've done those cases for the majority of my career. And then the last 6 years, I have been part of the complex child abuse unit, and so I do really heavy child murder cases. And so people don't know, in Los Angeles between 2015 and 2019, we had 119 child murders. That is a lot for a county. And so my unit handles pretty big child murder cases in Los Angeles County, usually if the Department of Children and Family Services are involved, and it involves a caretaker or a parent or a guardian. I handle those cases. Currently, I have 17 active child murder cases in Los Angeles County. I was just at one this morning in Alhambra of a little baby who was killed. And so I go usually mostly over LA County, mostly North County, and handle these cases. I do want to recognize, number one, Dawn and John. Thank you both so much for doing this. You know, children depend on us. They can't vote. They don't have any lobbyists. You know, they depend on adults to fight for them. And so definitely very honorable to both of you to put this on. I think it's important. I also want to recognize why I do what I do. And sitting in the front row is two of Gabriel Fernandez's family members. And I've known them a long time, and I consider them family, and they're here. And also my friend Emma, whose son was killed here in Los Angeles. She's here. My friend Bertha, whose daughter was murdered as a result of sex trafficking. She's here. And so, you know, what people don't realize is there's a lot of victims and family members, and they're really affected. Like, I think in LA County, we talk a lot about the people who do the crimes, but we always seem to leave out the family members and the victims, the people who've lost someone. I hope most people understand that a parent doesn't ever recover after losing their child. And so I fight for them. I just want to tell Don thank you, and John thank you for having me here, and thank the families for coming out. And I could tell you, as far as this panel goes, we all support you. We support all of you, and we'll keep fighting for all of you.
I also want to say, I know how surreal it is. I actually came out and I said, when you have a child who's been hurt or killed, you never think you're going to be here. So I understand what it's like every time you come to something like this. It doesn't feel like you should be here, they should be here, and you shouldn't be having to do this. And I really appreciate you guys coming, because I know how much that it pains your heart, and your whole world gets turned upside down. So thank you. I feel how your pain is. Sorry. Okay. I guess I want to ask, how important is reporting even just the suspicion of child abuse? What are the common and more subtle signs and symptoms of child abuse that we should keep an eye out for? I think that we miss things all the time. So Bethel, do you want to address that?
So when I took this position, I am the complex child abuse unit in Orange County. We're a smaller county. It's still more than a one-person job, but for now, it's me. And I do the most serious of cases, so if it's bruising or bloody noses or something that would be considered a misdemeanor, then those are not handled by me. Those go to different units. I really didn't have any understanding of what we were looking for in child abuse. I did not know that bruises on a baby are very unnatural, but they are. Sometimes when babies are hurt and they have broken limbs, they don't cry, and it's surprising. Babies' bones break in really specific ways, and lots of times their little bones are broken from sort of a torque and torsion motion. And there's, frankly, a whole science behind child abuse that when you're doing cases like this, you have to learn. But certainly, when you see bruises on an infant, that's definitely a sign. Kids who are shut down, kids who are wearing long sleeves and are covered up and they have hats on because somebody is trying to hide the fact that they have patches of hair missing. I think, it looks different depending on the age of the child and if that child is around other people, if they're at school or daycare, or if they're at home. Certainly, depending on the age of the child, the mandated reporters that they interact with should be the safety guard, right? So if you have an infant who's going to their pediatrician and the infants have bruising on their faces or their torso or something like that, that should be an immediate red flag. If you've got children in school and there's bruising or they're beginning to act differently, that's an immediate red flag. And I give a lot of presentations around the Orange County community sort of talking about what to look for, but I always tell our community members, even if you think it's nothing, report, because you just never know. It's like the tip of the iceberg when we begin to investigate these cases, and there's always so much more. There's a whole history and life behind that one incident of abuse. So many of our infants, just for example, when they finally get taken to the hospital and for perhaps an acute injury, most of them have healing injuries. Most of them have been abused historically, and we're just finding out now. So I tell everybody, if you see anything, even if you're convinced it's nothing, always report it, call it in.
It's so important. I'm sure you might have something to say about that too. Mandated reporters, tell me, I'd like to know who they all are. I know we have teachers, hospital workers, social workers, police. Who else am I missing in that?
That's mostly the group is first off, mandated reporters are mandated by law. It's in the penal code who has to actually report. Counselors, teachers, social workers, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, hospital staff, doctors, nurses. There's a whole list of them in the penal code that says these are individuals that if they suspect child abuse, they have to report. I think one thing that needs to be talked about that people need to realize, it's just suspected child abuse. So you're not out there proving something beyond a reasonable doubt. Basically, if you see something, you need to say something. And I think most people have inside of them a feeling that if they see something going on, that they know if it's wrong or not. And so if you see a child that looks like they're abused or they're being abused, you need to report it because we have too many cases where people just don't want to get involved. That's it. They don't want to get involved. But this is one community. And so as one community, we're all responsible for the children. That means everybody's children. And so if you see a child who's being abused, you need to say something about it. And I agree with the statements that were made. I think children wearing long sleeve shirts or jackets during summertime is definitely an indicator that that's odd because they could have some injuries. Children who are withdrawn, who are used to get good grades and now they get bad grades, that's another big indicator. Children who come to school and then don't come to school. So if there's certain periods of time where you don't see a child for a period of time and all of a sudden they come back to school, that's usually unusual. And usually that could be something going on at the home and people need to pay attention to that as well. If a child's not eating or a child's eating so much, if a child looks like their clothes haven't been changed for a week or two, all those type of things are important to look at. But any type of mood changes, or if a child now is using drugs or something like that, you never know. There could be something going on in the home, and you want to kind of pay attention to that as well. And then obviously injuries. Black eyes is always an indicator of abuse. Nobody's getting a black eye usually from an accident or something like that. So black eyes on the face is another one that is indicator of something's happening bad to that child. So that's another one as well. So all those things are important to look at, but at the end of the day, people just need to, if you see something, you need to say something about it because we're all responsible for everybody's children.
And I just want to add one thing. I was a mandated reporter as a public school teacher, and I had to call the hotline, CPS, a couple of times. And what I didn't realize, even as a mandated reporter, is that hotline goes to CPS, but there's not always an overlap, at least in Orange County. There's not always an overlap between the police and CPS. And I never once called the police on some of my students who had grievous injuries. I called this hotline, but I would encourage everybody, also call the police, ask for a wellness check, because I know that there are cases, at least in my county, where there's an abused child, but the police are circumvented sometimes. And I'm certainly not suggesting that our CPS in Orange County are hiding anything, but they're parallel tracks. CPS has their own cases, and then we have the criminal cases. And lots of times we should overlap there, but there are misses sometimes. And so call the hotline, but call your police agency too and ask them to go just check it out, and they absolutely will.
I mean, that's one thing for sure. I think that if you could call both, really, right? Because they are on totally different tracks. They don't communicate. They have very different viewpoints. CPS often wants to keep the family together if it's healthy and able to do so. The police are more coming at it from an investigative angle usually. So I think if you call both, you're covering your tracks. And again, it will be investigated. You're not really causing anything to happen, but you really could save a life. I mean, repeatedly.
No, Bethel's 100% right. You should call both because they're different, number one. Number two, it's good to have two sets of eyes. it's good to have, one, you got the social workers, and then two, you have the police. Sometimes the police may see something the social workers don't. Sometimes the social workers may see something the police don't. So you call the hotline first, and then right after that, you call 911. It's good to have two sets of eyes. I can tell you in both, the Gabriel case and the Anthony case, those things were missed. Sometimes they would call a social worker. Sometimes they would call the social worker through the cell phone. Or maybe sometimes they call the police and not a social worker. It's good to call both and get them both involved in what's going on. And I think what Bethel said is 100% right, because a lot of times we kind of miss that. And even though there's cross-reporting, so in Los Angeles, it's mandated that there has to be cross-reporting. And so that means if social workers get a hotline call, they have to cross-report it to the police. But I can tell you that does not happen a lot. They miss it. Or they cross-report, and then sometimes the police don't go out there for a week or two. And, how does that help anything? Because, for child abuse, it's an emergency. The other problem is social workers, a lot of times, they make it a 5-day referral instead of an immediate referral. So that's why you want to call the police. Number two, social workers get off work at 5 o'clock. And so, which is pretty disappointing, because if they get a call at 4 o'clock, they just go home. So you need to call the police, because the police are there 24 hours a day. So these are things people don't understand. I've asked social workers to understand, what did you do? And they said, I just went home. And you're just shocked. You're like, what are you talking about? And so, yeah, social workers go home at 5. Police are on 24 hours a day. Sometimes they fail to cross-report, so you need to do that. You need to get the police involved, so they go out there immediately. Sometimes social workers have a 5-day referral. That means a child's out there for 5 days before anybody goes out there and sees what's going on, where police is usually immediate. So Bethel is 100% right. You need to call them both.
And the next question is kind of for both of you guys, especially with you guys here. I had to ask about the Gabriel Fernandez and Anthony Avalos trials, because obviously they've been highly publicized strictly because of just the horrific nature of them. And I think that we all, if you haven't seen the documentary, it's called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. And it is something I believe every member of society should see. I literally tell people this every time I talk to them about abuse. It's so important that you see it to understand what it looks like. It will enlighten you, it will horrify you, and you'll start realizing, as we've talked about numerous times, Bethel, there almost sometimes is like this abuser playbook that sometimes is used, where you'll see abuse appear in these cases over and over again, things you would never think to do to a person, a child, an animal. It's just horrifying. With you both, I just want to ask, can you share a little bit about those cases, both from your perspective, which was prosecuting, to completion, and then also having to have this media eye and how you were going to tell that story?
How about Brian?
Okay.
No, I'm just having fun listening here. First of all, thank you very much for having me be a part of this. I really appreciate this. I think as a documentary filmmaker, you're often humbled by the people you interview. And I think your job is to kind of listen to the stories and understand them and put them in a form where you can, and use a platform to kind of, show them back to the public in a way that wakes people up and helps people understand the depth and the importance of people's stories. And I was just extremely proud to be able to tell the story and to use a platform like Netflix, which has 200 million people worldwide. I just can't think of a better person to profile or put on that platform than this 8-year-old boy, and someone that's more important than that. So I think when I first heard his story, the details are so intense. The depth of, I think you guys are experienced in this, and I wasn't. I came into this, not with this level of experience. And so I was just so profoundly shaken by the kind of details and the abuse that we saw with Gabriel, that I had to tell that story. And then when you look at Gabriel and you understand what kind of an 8-year-old boy he was and what had happened to him, and you combine that with the real failure of the social workers in this case, and the kinds of things you guys are talking about, and the reporting and the CPS, and the way that broke down to the point where the CPS and the social workers were facing charges themselves. This was a case that needed to be unpacked and understood, and was a kind of entry point into the broader failures of this system. So that's basically why I was moved by it. But when we asked the judge if we could be a part of it and get inside the courtroom and actually film this. Kind of unusual. It's up to the
Yeah,
judge.
very.
It doesn't always happen.
With a child, oftentimes they immediately shut that down.
Yeah. But I think the egregious nature of this case, they let us cameras in, and so we just were along for the ride, and we heard it as it was unfolding, and Jonathan was so kind of open about what he was going through that I just feel like we really captured this story in a way that I hope everybody sees and watches and kind of points to the real failures in the system.
It really rose. I mean, didn't it go to #1 on Netflix? I mean, just in
Yeah, it
terms
was
of
like
viewership,
3
that's
weeks or
so
something. It was
amazing that
huge.
people would watch
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Because it's really hard to watch, and it really shocked me. People would warn me not to watch it. They didn't think I could handle it as a victim's mom.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I needed to watch it. I
Yeah.
learned so much from it. Do you think the judge decided to let you guys shoot because he knew that the community and really the world needed to see what this looked like, because there hasn't been a lot of openness with this?
I think so. I mean, you're speculating a little bit. He's not super, the judges are, he was a fantastic judge. I thought he was kind of an amazing figure in this case. And he's not letting you know.
Right.
These
They're not very
things.
open book, the
This is
judges,
kind
right?
of the
That's not,
point.
yeah.
But I think you can tell, especially from the final statements that he made, how much this meant to him. And I think that's probably the reason why he let us in there.
Thank you so much for putting it out there, because again, I think it reaches audiences that never would see it, anything like that otherwise. And you told Gabriel's story.
We got lucky to have Brian because, I think Brian can tell you a lot of people, there isn't a lot of child abuse documentaries or things on TV because people don't really want to see them, because they're really tough to watch. And people also don't want to believe that happens. And so we're lucky that, Brian was able to not only film it, but he was able to get on Netflix. Even my relationship with Brian and his team, I know people don't realize this, but I really didn't even know Brian or what they were doing at first. I wasn't sure what was going on, so, because the 9th floor is a media floor, but then Brian had his own team and his own camera. And it wasn't until they were following me across the street with the camera that I was like, what is this exactly? And then I kind of met them and talked to them and was trying to figure out what exactly they were doing. I also didn't really understand the concept of how big Netflix was until that actually came out. And it's definitely affected my life still and my cases as far as how juries get picked and me going into court and whatnot. People don't realize that, Gabriel was a little boy, and he was tortured for a long time. 8 months is a long time. 8 months to live in a box every day, every night, to be tied up, to have to urinate in that box, to be force-fed cat litter. When we did the autopsy, that was all that was in his stomach, was cat litter. His penis was cut, also burned. Those are things people have a hard time, accepting or understanding. Like a prisoner of war. The thing about those cases, Gabriel's case and Anthony's case, is they had other siblings, but they focused on one child mostly. And so I do consider both Gabriel's case and Anthony's case hate crimes. Both those cases, at least the murderers and torturers believed that Gabriel and Anthony were gay. And that was some of the reason why they were focusing all their hatred and violence towards those children versus, the other children that were in the household as well. And so, these are serious cases, and they're really brutally horrible cases. Gabriel's teeth were knocked out by his mom. Most people don't like to go to the dentist. Can you imagine have your teeth knocked out and not get any pain medication, not be able to go to the dentist and have to sleep like that?
And by someone you should be able to trust that
Right,
protects you.
in a box. So these are really, and it happened, and so is hard. I think it's hard to go through those things and understand them. But I could tell you this, being able to go into court and stand up and be the voice for these children, like, I think that's, for me, that's always what I wanted to do. I cried too, John. A lot.
Bethel cries too. It was one of the first things when we were talking about our case. We her tears when she would talk about her cases and our case just hit me, because I guess I always think of prosecutors as being very structured, and actually seeing you cry in the document. That's why I reached out to him. I'm sure it was creepy. I stalked him a little on Instagram, and then I stalked Brian, and I already knew Bethel. But I mean, seeing prosecutors actually have emotion for these kids means more to me. I don't understand when they have none, unless it's a defense mechanism, but even then I don't. I guess that's one of the things I want to ask is, when you're a civilian in the belly of the beast, like you shooting this, and how do you guys, working closely with child abuse cases, how has it changed the way you view or see the world or approach the world with your children, as a woman? I mean, as a filmmaker, how has it changed the way you see it in terms of just daily life? Because I know it's changed me.
Bethel.
How has it changed the way I see child abuse, or the way I
The
just see?
world, just acting every day in life, how has it changed you? As I was saying earlier, it just breaks your trust as victims' parents. But how has it changed you in terms of just walking out your door in the morning, or your kids going to school, or who they date, things like that?
It takes a lot of mental work, I think. You try to keep it in boxes, but at the end of the day, when a horrible torture case comes in, you spend the first day looking at the pictures and just crying and weeping for that child. Then you go home and for me, I'm probably extra nice to my kids. I'm probably a very different mother now. And then the next day you wake up and you say, let's go get them. Let's get them. We can make sure that does not happen again. But it definitely, I think just working in this line of work, and I've done a bunch of other types of cases as well, and so you know that there are depraved people out there, but when you see firsthand what that depravity looks like when it's inflicted on a child, it makes you step back a little bit, and you do have to sort of treat yourself and your family differently in order to wake up and do this every day.
I work out a lot.
You run.
I run a lot. Brian knows.
Sure.
They were filming me all over downtown, running around. I run a lot with my music. I think for me, it's therapeutic. I usually do it during lunch. I would, in the Gabriel case and the Anthony case, after trial was over, I'd go out and work out. My wife's a detective in the sheriff's department, and she does domestic violence cases, so I at least have a best friend to talk to about these cases, because most people don't want to talk to, you about these type of cases. I learned a lot about myself. I was really angry and mad during the Gabriel case, and I think I brought a lot of that home. I was much better in the Anthony case. I try to self-reflect about myself, and you get angry about what happens to these kids, and so I was a lot better in the Anthony case. I'm also a lot older as a prosecutor, and my wife, gave birth to our son shortly before I got the Gabriel case, whereas now I'm sort of been doing these cases a little bit longer. But prosecutors are humans. We're people. I'm a dad. I'm also paranoid about my kids because of my cases, especially doing all the sexual abuse prosecutions I did. So I'm really paranoid about where my kids go, who they stay with, and I think they don't like dad for that, because I'm very protective of them, and but I think a lot of prosecutors are, because they kind of like what they see. So I do that. I have a belief system because it's hard for me to deal with these cases. So I believe in something bigger than myself, which I think helps me try to understand these cases. So I think things like that are good. Try to figure out what you can do to try to deal with these cases. But I truly believe God wants me to do these cases. So, I know they're hard, but I think God wants me to do them. So, I'm going to keep doing them, as long as I'm humanly able to. But they're hard, and, you meet with families. And even today, I met with the mom of my case. I hadn't met her. I went to her house. We do that as prosecutors. People don't realize outside of court, we go to their houses. We talk to the family. We talk to the extended family. We become part of what's going on because that's being human. And I think those are important things to do, to just be human and to be part of the community. But they're hard. They're hard. I think there's a lot of things people could do. I go to therapy. So when I did Brian's documentary, I hadn't been going to therapy. But now I'm going through a lot of trauma in my work, so I'm going through therapy as well, which I think has been good for me to do that, just because of these cases. So I think therapy is good, and I think some people are like shy or they are ashamed to go to therapy. I'm not. It's good to talk to somebody who sort of doesn't know what I'm dealing with, and so it's helped me, and I think it's good for me. So I go to therapy, so those type of things.
I think that's imperative. I mean, that's one of the questions I was going to ask later, but I'm going to ask now. Like, how do you, one of the questions I know that Bethel said you get asked a lot, and that I got asked on social media channels when I asked everybody what they wanted to know, how do you take care of yourselves when you're making a film, when you're prosecuting a case? How do you take care of yourself? Everybody talks about self-care a lot, but I mean, the self-care you must have to practice it goes through past everything that we do, that when we aren't working on a case like you guys are, shooting something like that.
Yeah, this was the first, I think a lot of people don't, when you make a series like this, there's a whole team that's working on this. A lot of people are looking at this. And I think one of the things that you don't often realize is that, you're looking at the same footage over and over and over again, sometimes for 6 or months or more, or even a year to cut it. So you're having this repeat thing. So this actually, creating this series was the first time. We actually had a therapist on staff.
How big was the team, by the way, that you were working with?
There's probably 12 people worked on this. And so we actually it was an interesting way we did it. It was sort of, we had engaged somebody who was had some experience in this area. And people could leave anytime that they wanted. Didn't have to tell us about it. We didn't know when they went or didn't have to ask permission or anything. But that was just available for anybody involved on the staff at any time. And people used it quite a bit.
I mean, it's really seeing evil. I want you to answer too, but I think that there are people that go through their whole lives and never see evil, and you see evil almost every day, or every day when you're working on a project. So how do you take care of yourself? Because it really is, to me, it feels like, I always, my Southern Baptist church that my grandparents, had us go to when we were little, and you hear about evil and you think of it as this very, esoteric thing, very far away from you. And then when it is in your home or when you are addressed with it, you're just like, oh no, evil's real. It feels almost like possession of evil. It's so terrible. So how do you counter that? Because you are a very positive person. You're a very positive person. How do you do that and still function?
Well, nobody said I'm functioning.
She is, I promise.
I actually wanted to dovetail a little bit on something that Brian said, because I do feel like in this line of work, and at least in Orange County, LA is a behemoth of a county. In Orange County, there's a real community of child abuse workers. The detectives who work on these cases get terribly invested, and for a lot of them, they don't do these type of cases every single day, so they don't necessarily even know what they're looking for when we start. The doctors, we've got very specific doctors at Chalk Hospital. Shout out to Chalk, they do amazing things. And I think when I came into this position, it occurred to me, man, everybody in this community is giving 110%, and I would be insulting them if I didn't. To the point where I own my own scrubs so that I can roll up to Chalk at 3 a.m. Looking like a nurse and help direct my detectives who might be new and maybe don't know what they're doing. So it doesn't look like the DA just walked into the room to interview the parents, because that's a little nerve-wracking. So I do feel like there's a responsibility for us to take care of our teams in many ways. Thinking of an officer who pulled a baby out of a trash can in Fullerton about a month ago. you know, and watching his body-worn footage, knowing he had children at home. You know, I had to call him up and say, hey, I know this is just a Tuesday for you, but you saved that baby's life, and I hope that you have people at home that you can talk to and who will care for you, because that's a hard thing to sort of go home and compartmentalize. I have this, you know, I do a little meditation sometimes after a hard day when I get in my car and try to imagine all of it sort of washing off and shaking off, because I have to go home to my own kids. So it's a group effort. I mean, we see judges cry in these cases sometimes when we're in the middle of a difficult case and an officer gets emotional on the stand. After seeing these pictures over, I mean, we work on these cases for years. And, you know, and they're horrified, ma'am, in 19 years on this job, I've never, not even out in the field, ever shed a tear, and I'm so sorry I lost it for you in this courtroom. But often we'll just, during lunch, go back and find an empty office and just hug and cry and cry and cry, and then walk back into that courtroom with our suits buttoned up, ready to raise hell. But, you know, you've got to take care of yourself, and that looks different ways depending on where I am and what I'm doing, but it involves good people in my life, and, you know, really focus, therapy, yes, and therapy.
That makes me feel good, because I know a lot of people did have that question. And I do want to, the whole idea of evil, I just want to ask one thing about that. My big, I guess it's a mission, I feel like, is that child abuse does not discriminate. It does not, it crosses the racial boundary, it crosses religious boundary, it crosses socioeconomic boundary, education level. I mean, it crosses every boundary, and people miss abuse constantly because they think people didn't look like abusers. How do you guys, do you see that in your cases? Do you see that there is just an immense amount of diversity in different ways of, even the way the family structure is and everything like that?
Well, child abuse goes across all socioeconomic areas. It goes across all different ethnicities. So they're not, unlike certain types of cases, like I think you could look at gang cases, maybe in LA, and you kind of see them as one thing or the other thing. Child abuse is very, very diverse. So I have a case of a defendant who lives in Beverly Hills, who has a lot of money, who killed his child. I have cases, you know, all over. So child abuse happens all over. Doesn't matter what race you are, ethnicity you are, nationality you are. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. People abuse children, and so it does happen. Obviously, there are some factors to child abuse as far as if you're a young parent, you're more susceptible to maybe a situation of abuse, broken families, where you have a mom and then a boyfriend comes in, a mom-boyfriend dynamic, that's another red flag sometimes to abuse. Obviously, you know, there are socioeconomic issues as far as why child abuse does happen, and stress and whatnot. But it goes across all different walks of life. And the other thing I think you said, Dawn, that I think is important, and Brian asked me this many times, and his team did, you know, do I think these people are bad people? You know, do I think they're bad, evil people? And I do. You know, I told the jury in Gabriel's case that they were monsters. I told the jury in Anthony's case that they were monsters. I just think that if you abuse a child over a long period of time and you keep doing it over and over again, yeah, one, you're not a good person. Two, yeah, you are a bad, evil person and a monster. You know, and seeing that child suffering and not taking that child to the doctor and not doing anything. Those are just bad, bad people. And we do have some of them. In our society, we do have some bad, evil people. And so people want to know we do need prisons for those people, because we don't want those bad, evil people to hurt other people. So we don't want to have more victims and more children who are being abused, number one. Number two, there has to be some justice for the children and their families. And there has to be some accountability. So we say as a society, we don't allow that. You can't do that. You can't torture and murder a child. And so, but I think those are, you know, they're bad people. And I know some people don't like that. And, you know, Brian's team was really good and smart in trying to kind of flesh out, you know, because people want to know why. Everybody wants to know why.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Bethel could tell you, the jury, that's all they want to know is why. And usually I'll give them a motive, but unless defendants are willing to actually speak and be interviewed, it becomes very, very difficult to get to that answer. But my why is you have to be a bad, evil monster to murder a child, to torture a child over a long period of time, to do all these bad things to a child, somebody who's helpless, somebody who you're supposed to take care of. That's my belief, and I'm going to stick to it. And I think they're just bad people who do those things.
I would maybe just add to that I think there are these horrific things that have been done, and that people have these people that have done things that are just unimaginable. They're really unimaginable, and it's infuriating. But I'm also maybe equally infuriated, or even sometimes more infuriated, by institutions that fail. In other words, there's this sort of famous line that the only thing truly necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And so and that's part of the Gabriel Fernandez story as well. The system itself failed, and is full of a series of incentives that allowed him to fall through the cracks. And so that part of it is sometimes missed. It's not quite as dramatic. It's a little more. It's a different kind of evil, I think, but it's an evil in which collectively we don't understand and create systems that help people like Gabriel.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think everybody feels like that, and I think you can't watch your series and not get that from it, for sure. I think that even if you delve into any of these cases, you see that repeatedly. There was something missed either by we're not educating the medical community enough. Doctors miss stuff all the time. Emergency room doctors send people home. We've got the social workers. We've got, teachers actually are a lot of times the biggest allies, actually. They do so much, and they go far beyond their pay grade to really help these kids. So, I commend so many teachers. But when it comes to doctors and social workers missing it, there should be no reason for that. There's got to be better education. There's got to be better training. And there has to be enough supervision where you have check-in points where people can't slip through, where the kids can't slip through the system. So I'm so glad you said that.
Brian's right. DCFS completely failed Gabriel and completely failed Anthony, and has failed a lot of the children in my cases. They have. And we, as a community, we pay taxes, and our taxes go to governmental agencies, and we expect our governmental agencies in Los Angeles County to be the best. I think we're the best county. We should have the best governmental agencies. And the government's number one job is to protect us, to protect children. And they've failed that numerous times in Los Angeles, numerous times. Not only in Gabriel's case, but it keeps happening over and over again. And so, there needs to be changes. We need to have better people in those positions. We need to train them better. We need to have better social workers. We need to have better police officers who are trained better, who understand different things about children. Those are, one of the great things about, Brian's documentary is it really shed light on what DCFS failed to do, which was protect Gabriel. And they continue to make mistakes. It doesn't mean that we don't have good social workers. We do. Doesn't mean we don't have good police officers. We do. But we deserve better. And, I think that people need to realize that.
And there need to be consequences for the bad ones.
100%. 100% that I hope in the future California decides to pass a law that will allow us to hold social workers accountable for gross negligence. Right now, we don't have that. We don't have that law, and certain individuals have been trying to get that passed. But if we want to hold police accountable, which we should be able to hold social workers accountable as well. Mm-hmm. That just makes sense to me, especially when they're in charge of taking care of children.
Bethel, I want to go to something we talk about a lot, and it's the timeline of child abuse. I know that we've shared this about kind of the trajectory of what it looks like, and you have really described it so well to me so that I understand it, even though I have witnessed it firsthand. Seeing it from your perspective is so helpful. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in order to talk about that, I have a couple of pictures, trigger warning, but this is usually a pretty crowd-friendly set of photos. It's nowhere near my worst case.
They're pretty bad, though, so just be prepared.
But I think that they really do go to sort of show the timeline for, that's sort of indicative of many cases. In fact, one of the very first child abuse cases I did not know going in this was going to be a child abuse. A call came in on my way to work at 7 a.m. from detectives. I was doing domestic violence at the time, and it sounded like a domestic violence case where an almost 3-year-old girl had accidentally gotten stabbed down into her intestines because, according to the parents, they were tussling and she somehow got in the way. And it wasn't until we had been working on this case all day and we got to the forensic interviewing center in Orange County to talk to some of the siblings, and I saw this picture that I realized what we were working with. She's 2 years and 9 months old, and she's about the size of a 10-month-old. So when we did some more digging onto this case, we found that actually she had been taken away from her birth parents right at birth. She was born with meth in her system, and she lived with a very loving foster family for about 15 months of her life, and this is essentially what she looked like during that first year. Beautiful, happy, healthy, smiliest. I mean, every photo they provided us, she's smiling and waving and just full of life. And so, I think our question and our job is to figure out how you go from this to this. And there is a happy ending. This is her now. I always like to bring a happy ending. She is with a new foster family, and they are in love with her. But this poor girl, from the time she got reconnected with her birth parents and got to that photo I showed you, there were so many incidents and missed incidents. We have some CPS failures, in every county. It's impossible to catch everything given the lack of resources that we have. And there were many missed failures on this case. And so by the time it came to us, we realized that there had been so many governmental interactions with this family. I made this really very high-tech slide. And I use this with some of my trainings just to talk about how, usually, and I'd say in most of the cases that come to us, when we begin to do some digging, the date of the abuse that we're prosecuting is not the first governmental contact with the families. There are several reports, usually in these babies' histories, and honestly, the saddest part is when there aren't, but it's very clear based on the healed injuries in them that abuse has been going on forever. And so typically, we get on the date of abuse, we're looking, when they begin the investigation, they're just looking at that particular incident, just the snapshot. Why are these bones broken today? Why do we have, retinal hemorrhages here today? And these cases, and I'm sure Jonathan knows exactly what I'm talking about, and I bet you do too, Brian, after working on that case. But these are very different cases to work because there's a whole life and there's a whole backstory and there is a whole before this date for each of these children and misses by the system for each of these children. And oftentimes there's an after where you begin to see, oh, they can grow and they can learn and they're not horrible kids, as their parents sometimes justify their actions by saying. And so there's almost always a before and an after, and I think we're doing our kids a disservice by not recognizing that, which is why we came out of the bullpen rushing with, if you see anything, please call.
I think that's so powerful. I know just seeing the aftermath of it, that's something we live with every day. I mean, today, just case in point, Waylon suffered 8 epileptic seizures today as a result of child abuse. It is not a one-time thing. It is not like he had a head injury and now it's over. Our journey is lifelong. We have a life sentence. That's why these abusers need life sentences. Because if my child's gonna have to live a life sentence of a life he didn't deserve, then they need to get that as well. But he had 8 seizures a day that rocked his body, and they would wake him up from naps. So he's not even sleeping more than 7 hours a day right now because he can't go to sleep and take a nap without a seizure, waking up in full body like stiffness. And then also he has something I call a robot seizure where his eyes will flutter and it looks like his brain is resetting. It is one of the scariest things I've ever seen in my entire life. But so many head injury babies. I actually hate the term shaken baby because it is really head trauma abuse, and there are so many different kinds. It can be beating against a door. It can be shaking. It can be, I mean, there's so many. But I think that just knowing that that's what you get from that, you get epilepsy, you can get cerebral palsy, which we never think of with abuse until you actually have a child that goes through it. So it is a life sentence. The aftermath is even more evil than the initial act. It's something they live with forever. And, you know, I want to ask this, and it's a really tough question, but I really want to ask it. As a mother of a child abuse survivor, I know the horror that we went through, but I'm consistently horrified by the sinister nature of these abusers. And as I mentioned earlier, it's like there's this one I keep seeing in all these cases, they make them kneel on rice. Where do they read that? How do they know that? Did their parents do it to them? I mean, how do they get these twisted kinds of torture, or the kitty litter, or making them, you know, like the dress hanging on the back of the door? I mean, I just, for Gabriel, I want to know how, if there is a playbook, are they looking online? Do they talk to other abusers? I know that's not probably what it is, but where do they concoct these things?
You get some similarities. I could tell you a lot of real abusive parents seem to use hot sauce on children a lot. I've seen that over and over in a lot of my cases that include torture, is this hot sauce, like on the face or in the mouth. The kneeling on rice, which was in Anthony's case, which was horrendous for such a long period of time, that happened to Anthony's mom. And so Anthony's mom, Heather Barron, learned about that because it happened to her. And so she then started doing it to her child. So you do see some of that as well as things that happen to them as parents. But you see a lot of similarities about locking children in either rooms or in certain areas, rubbing children's faces in urine and things like that. Seems to a lot of these individuals who torture children seem to do things of that nature. I don't know if, I will tell you this, that I guarantee you a lot of these individuals have gone through trauma in their life as well. And so I was abused as a child, and so my wife is really responsible for the discipline of my children. And part of that is just, in my life, I've had a lot of hard time with anger issues, and, you know, I joined the Army and I really turned my life around, and I do understand things, you know. Everybody's still responsible for their actions, we all are, but you do have to try to understand people and understand that people have been through trauma, and how does that affect them, and how does that affect them when they raise their children. And I'll always be a survivor of child abuse, and that will always stick with me, and I'll always remember those type of things, and certain things do make me upset and angry, you know. So I think a lot of these parents went through that as well. So you do have to look at that, and I think that is something that we need to take into consideration. If we do really want to help people, we have to help them at a younger age, when they're kids, with first better schools, much better schools. Another way really is our foster care system. We have the worst foster care system in the best county in the world. And so if I could tell you anything, is be a foster parent.
100%.
Children need forever homes, and there's a lot of them. They need a parent, and we don't have that. And so we do have a lot of these issues where these individuals have been through trauma, and then, you know, it gets worse and worse for them. So I think a lot of these people it happened to them.
Yeah.
Doesn't give them an excuse for doing it, but it does tell people sort of kind of where some of this is coming from and whatnot. Obviously, they're still responsible for what they did, but I think it's something that we all should look at, because as prosecutors, even though we're there to make sure we prosecute a case and make sure the public is safe and make sure we get justice, but I'm also a dad, and I live in this community. I'm raising my kids in this community, so I want our community to be better. And I know Bethel wants that, and I definitely know Brian wants that, and I know you want that, Dawn. And so how do we do that? And the way we do that is to make lives better for children all over the community. I think the foster care system really needs a lot of people in that actually helping give kids forever homes.
And people are really intimidated by the foster care system. I mean, I have a friend in here who's been a foster mom, and it is a process, but a lot of people tell me they don't think they'd be approved, or they don't have a nice house, or they don't have this. There are all kinds of foster families, and if you have a loving heart and you want to help these kids, I urge it so much. I have so many friends that want to have children, and I said, regardless, maybe foster, I'm considering it in the future as well, because I have a lot of love to give, and I think if you have love to give, and that's something that you should consider. And it isn't the process always that you think it's going to be. It sometimes is a little bit easier, and sometimes they need a family so much, you get checked out, and all of a sudden you have a child. So I also, what you were talking about, generational trauma has been a very hot topic. I know there was a show made that really explained it kind of beautifully without having to say it in words. And something you said in the documentary that just touched my heart was when you said, I remember being, something to the effect of, I remember really being small and powerless. And I think that anyone who's been abused as a child knows what that feels like. And I'm sure it serves you really well in what you do, because that is a very specific feeling that some people, I realize there's some people that have never felt that.
People don't realize what it feels like to just be so small, and yeah, you are powerless. You can't do anything. And you always remember those times, you never outlive your childhood. We try to get past it, but we don't outlive it. And Brian can tell you, I could tell you when Ezekiel and Virginia were up there testifying, and then in Anthony's case, when Destiny was testifying. I hope some of them were getting their power back by doing that, but it is a really emotionally driven situation where it's just, you could feel it in the courtroom, and so you do feel powerless because you're in this home, and these big people are in charge, and they're just abusing you, and there's nothing you could do, and you're afraid. You're scared. I remember even my dad yelling would make me start crying. He would yell so loud and I still remember that I would just be scared. I remember once him picking me up by my hair and slamming me, and there's for a while you also think that that's normal, that's happening to other people too, and you obviously you realize at some point that that's not normal, but you feel that way. And I know when my kids get up there and testify, I understand that, and I do my best to try to give them the power back, and try to be able to get up and say what they are going to say. And I can tell you, Ezekiel and Virginia, they're doing good. They both graduated from high school.
Oh, that's great.
I do talk to them, and I do talk to their uncle, and they'll never outlive what happened, but I think they're doing okay. And, with Anthony, Destiny, and Raphael, we're going to have the sentencing, and they're going to come, and they're going to actually make victim impact.
Oh, wow.
And that's great for kids of that age to come and face these horrible torturers and take back their power. And those are good things, at least they get to feel something of power. But yeah, you feel powerless. And I know other people feel that too, not just children, in all sorts of different type of cases, domestic violence, relationships, you feel powerless, you can't do anything. Yeah, these are hard. They're hard cases. And so I hope people do understand that. When people say, well, why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you do this? You don't know what to do. And you feel like you can't do anything.
And testifying in a case is one of the most horrifying things you'll ever go through. I mean, we talk about, what is it, death, divorce, moving fires, things like that are the most stressful things. But testifying in a criminal case is one of the most unnerving, frightening things because you have two different attorneys who are trying to prove a case, and especially when there's a defense attorney involved. I mean, I'll stop there.
The defendant's there too, so that's the thing. Is it's
Yeah.
scary? They're standing there, and right there's the defendant, the people who beat them and beat their sibling, and
Just having to see all that, yeah.
they're so brave.
So
They're
brave.
braver than I could ever be to get up there and do that.
Thank you guys for answering all these. I know, how much time do we have, John? Oh, well, everyone's like, uh-oh, no. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I do want to talk about a little bit more about the family factors. I know we've talked about the behavioral patterns, but let's talk about the scapegoat child, because I know we've talked about your cases a lot, that there is this term scapegoat child. And a lot of you might know through, if you've done any research or read magazines or, watched the crime shows, with sociopathy, psychopathy, and narcissism, a lot of times in a family, there's one child that's picked as kind of the whipping boy, literally, or the scapegoat, and the other children might go unscathed, or you might have even a golden boy or a golden child, and the other child, it's a whole dynamic that you can look at if there's more than two children. But do you guys see that in your cases a lot? Is that something you see often?
Absolutely, and I'm just speaking anecdotally for my caseload. I don't know that I've done a ton of research on this, but on every one of my torture cases, there were always other siblings in the home, and they would choose one child. We've tried to answer the why question tonight more than once, and I just don't know that there is a why. There's no way for this to make sense to those of us who aren't doing that. The other children, sometimes they suffer, some abuse, but it's a milder abuse. Sometimes they're not abused at all, but there will be that one child who is just tortured and, zip tied to the bed for a year, and it doesn't make any sense, but I don't think I have any cases of torture where that hasn't been the case.
I agree with Bethel. I would say that most of my torture and murder cases, it's usually a mom-boyfriend dynamic. You have the mom, and then you have the boyfriend, and it's usually the non-biological child, at least one of the non-biological children who is abused the most. I can tell you in Gabriel's case, I think Pearl and Asara Aguirre, Pearl was sort of a tough female. She was involved in gangs, and she was really tough. And Asara Aguirre is sort of this wannabe guard, police officer type. And so they viewed Gabriel as sort of a softer boy, sort of he was more caring and more loving of a child. And I think that's where they also got, oh, he must be gay. Oh, we're going to make him wear dresses. And then they started, torturing and abusing him, and they picked on him the most. Anthony's case is a little bit similar. I think Anthony also was the oldest and was sort of fighting back a little bit and protecting his siblings. So I think that was part of it too. But both of them are sort of similar like that. So I agree with Bethel. They usually pick on one child. I have another case of a mom who she didn't like girls. She thought her 4-year-old daughter was fast or was somehow sexually active at 4. And for whatever reason, she didn't like girls, and so she tortured and murdered her 4-year-old and didn't touch the boys. So she picked on this girl because she felt like the girl, she would always say, close your legs or do this, and so, which is, she's 4. So but that's sort of, you get these type of kind of irrational things that parents do, and so in that case, she picked on the girl and not the 2 boys. So you do see those cases, the torture cases. Usually they'll pick one child, and they'll pick a reason. A lot of times it has to do with hate, and that's why I do bring up Gabriel and Anthony, because there are a lot of times children. We have to let children be who they are, and the bullying that not only could happen in school, but happen at home, it breaks you down. It really breaks you down, and I don't think you ever recover from that. And so children have to be allowed to be children. And we have to make sure that we're promoting that in school and promoting that at home, so they get to be who they are.
I know that with moms in the cases, I mean, we can get into the whole mom-dad dynamic, which I won't go into, but I will say that I know by talking with social workers, 80% of women go back to the abusers, even after, if the child's been killed, if the child has had a severe head injury or multiple, torturous abuse over months, years, women will go back 80% of the time, which is why a lot of times a baby is removed from the family, because they are used to women going back to these abusers. It's much more often they go back than leave. And there's almost like, there can be a lot of factors in that. It can be financial dependency, it can be their abuse themselves, it can be generational trauma and they've learned that's okay. But that's one thing that really shocked me, that mothers a lot of times will not stand up and defend, sometimes because they can't, but other times just because they would rather keep that family dynamic of having a partner rather than losing a child in some cases, which to me is like the most horrifying thing I ever had learned.
I'll tell you, in Anthony and in Gabriel, the moms, one, they weren't very motherly.
Right.
Where most moms are very motherly, these two weren't. Number two, these two were very narcissistic. Mm-hmm. Number three, I could tell you, if you approach a mom and ask to look at her cell phone and you look at her pictures, the mom's gonna have a gazillion pictures of their kids. My wife has, a few pictures of me, but mostly they're of my kids. Well, Pearl and Heather had barely any pictures of their kids. They had selfies of themselves. Oh. And so both of them, because we get their phones and get phone dumps. And so there's this narcissistic type of behavior. They're not very motherly, because most moms, that's it. They have all these pictures, They didn't. They had selfies of themselves. And so I've seen that dynamic before on my torture cases where they're not very motherly. Now, in general, domestic violence is horrendous, and many women are in that cycle, and that does happen. But for my torture cases, these are kids who are tortured over a long period of time. And the moms, at least in both those cases, were active participants in the abuse and torture of their kids. But it's usually this narcissistic type of behavior and the lack of the motherly instinct, I think, that allows that to happen.
I was just going to piggyback on that too. I'm really glad that Jonathan mentioned the cycle of abuse, because often aside from torture, where I personally believe that there is some real diabolical, sinister stuff going on in many of those cases, but a lot of our other abuse cases, that sort of child abuse, that's not the only abuse in the house. There's domestic violence between the mom and the boyfriend, or the parents, or the adults in the house in general. And that cycle it's just insipid. And I'm sure most of you are aware of it, but when it trickles down to the children, I think one of the most heartbreaking things is whenever there's a child who lives, we visit them in the hospital and check on them or send the detectives out, they always say, "Tell my mom I love her." They don't want to testify against their own parents. They believe that they deserved what happened to them. They've internalized it, that they're the bad kid. You can imagine that the type of lifelong work it takes for these children to kind of work through that, and some overcome that and some don't. But that cycle of abuse where the mom isn't protecting her child from the boyfriend or somebody else in the home because they don't want to leave him, that cycle continues to these babies where they don't want to leave their parents. They think there must be something wrong with them, and they just want their parents' love.
I actually got asked this too, and I know that it's a hard question for you guys, but I bet you'll want to address it. It was from somebody on Instagram named Cinny Bunny, and she said, why does it take, she's a cute name, why does it take so long to prosecute and get justice, and why is it so difficult to prosecute? It seems that the process to get justice is another traumatic event for the victims and their families. I can vouch for that. How do you guys address that even?
I mean, those are really good questions. I would say the first thing I would say, and Bethel probably agrees, many of our cases we can't even file. And that's the most difficult thing. People only see the cases we file, but many of the cases we can't file.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean we don't believe them. I believe most of the cases that come before me. But it's a high standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's also a very big responsibility that we have. And so many of the cases we can't even file, and they stick with you, and you feel guilty. So, I think that's one thing, a lot of cases we don't file. The cases we do file, I think murders, at least in Los Angeles, because we have so many cases, certain cases take priority over other cases. Many of these murder cases sometimes take 4 or 5 years. And I know most families are, that's a lot to wait for closure. The problem is that if Beth or I rush the defense and make them go to trial in 2 or 3 years, and we get a conviction, they could appeal and say we didn't get enough time. And then can you imagine 10 or 20 years later coming back and then having to do that case over again? So for these really serious cases, these murder cases, even though we have a speedy trial right as well, we usually try to wait for the defense to make sure that they're ready before either I or the judge pushes them to trial. They usually delay because most of the time in these cases we have all the evidence and they know it's not looking good for them, and so they kind of delay and delay and delay. And it's really tough for the family, but the right to being able to do their trial and be prepared many times trumps all these other things. And it's probably not the worst thing because we want to make sure if we get a conviction, it's not overturned because we didn't give them enough time. I think that's another one. And in court, the court system's hard. I think Bethel and I probably do the best we can to make it as comfortable as possible and bring our kids in and show them around and make them comfortable with the judge and, try to say it's their case and do the best we can, and have victim advocates and have, dogs and all these different things. I try to do that as much as I can to make the process as pleasant as possible. But I think there's only a few people who like the court system, and I'm one of them, and most other people don't. And it's just sort of the nature, because you're reliving something that's horrendous.
Oh, yeah.
Either if you're sexually assaulted, you have to talk about that, which is horrendous, or physically, it's uncomfortable. People don't want to do it, but we do afford the defendants the most rights of any country, and overall, that's probably a good thing. But it does seem to leave out the victim and the family and whatnot. And I think those are important questions, and they're hard to talk about. But I think we try to do the best we can to try to show the family that we care about them, and it is their case. And we try to be available to them. But they're hard. I think those are hard questions. Maybe Bethel can enlighten us too on those.
Jonathan, you took the words right out of my mouth about how difficult and painful it is to be a victim in the court system. The other reason why these cases are so difficult to prosecute in court is because so often these babies cannot walk into court and tell us what happened to them. In this case right here, I use this slide a lot. If you'll go ahead and look at the red box. Oh, it's not there. The red circle, there it is. I'll ask, how do you think those got there? What do those look like to you? And most people say cigarette burns, right? Maybe meth pipe burns. They look like burns. We'll never know. We'll never know how those got there. Here we have this, what, appears to be, to the doctors, perhaps a carving. Dad's initial was an S. Or some sort of branding. But this victim will never be able to walk in because he was too young and tell us what happened. And unfortunately, there won't be any doctor that can walk in and say exactly how these injuries happened either. Defense will ask the doctor, Well, is it possible that those little marks are mosquito bites? Well, yes, it's possible. That will be the answer. Are these wounds consistent with burns based on the healing pattern and, other sort of medical data? They can say yes, they're consistent, but nobody will be able to walk to that court and tell the jury, this is how it happened. This is exactly what happened. No baby will ever walk in and say, well, I was crying too much, and so my dad took me and shook me. And so these cases are extremely challenging. And as Jonathan said, it is absolutely heartbreaking when a case comes in and, we have an ethical duty to file cases that we believe we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. We have ethical duties, and I sure would love to file everything that comes in because we believe the children when they tell us something happened. But we cannot file, ethically, we cannot file everything unless there's enough sort of corroborating evidence. And even when we have that, like in this case, it is extremely difficult to prove.
Our society right now is so saturated with crime shows, and we've watched Law and Order now for 40 years or something. It's been so much longer than not 40, like 30. But, we learn about intent and what's the intent. And really in court, what I've learned from just watching and talking with friends and other victims going through it, through our foundation, is that intent really isn't a matter. It's more like, who was there? It was like the who, what, when, where. And it really shocked me as someone who used to watch those crime shows, and now I don't really. The intent really doesn't matter. And it's not really about saying this guy's a sociopath or he's a bad guy, because that doesn't really work either. It's just about, was this person there? What did they do? It's really, it's logic almost. I mean, it's just logic almost. It's logic, forensics, and what's the other word I'm looking for? But it's not intent, which is what we're all trained to look for in these. I do want to say, Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's
Okay.
I'm an observer of this of the legal system, but it certainly the length of time that it takes has its effect on the people involved in very profound ways.
Brian, I bet you were able to tell maybe a fuller story in your documentary than Jonathan would have been allowed to in court, because as we were talking about, there are many things that you probably wanted to show the jury or explain to the jury that you may not have been allowed to.
Yeah.
And you got to see all of that and share it in such a real and human way.
Yeah, my intention, my motivation is to tell the full story as truthfully as possible. I'm not arguing a case on one side or the other. We're often talking to the same people that were on the stands, but we want to understand the emotional kind of toll it's taking, what it's and it was just a series of some of the most powerful and gut-wrenching interviews I've ever done. I mean, it was really just profound to listen to people kind of open up. It's a different setting too.
Yeah.
When you talked about
Court is
going into a
scary.
courtroom.
Yeah,
I mean, we do everything possible to make this as few people as possible, as conversational as possible, to put people at ease, and hopefully that tells the actual kind of emotional story behind it. You
did a beautiful job of that. And I mean, even the way you interviewed him in his home, it definitely came across different than you were in court, right?
I mean, I would say this. The key one was I trusted Brian and his team. Like, we ended up meeting, and I was trying to get an idea of what exactly they were trying to do. I also was very clear to them about my ethical duties, about putting any of that stuff out, during the trial, or, it's like, 'cause, those things we're not allowed to do. And Beth will tell you, it's unusual to be able to do a big documentary on a really big, capital punishment type case, because you're not sure if you could trust the people who are doing, the filming of it. But Brian was always very upfront, and his team was very upfront about what they were doing. I'm also, and I think Brian knows this, what you see is what you get with me. Pretty much, I'm open book. I believe that the public has a right to know what we're doing. It's the public's criminal justice system. and I'm just the prosecutor, and it was really Gabriel and Gabriel's family's case. But what you see is what you get with me, and so I think Brian sort of got that, and pretty much he was always welcome in my home, and around what was going on, and it was a very tough case because I was younger then. Also, we filed a pitches motion against the police, and they threatened my wife, and so it was all like, those were some unusual things for a prosecutor. And even Beth could tell you that it was a wild ride and a wild case, and I'll always Gabriel's family is part of my family, and the Gabriel case is part of me, who lived with me forever. But there was a lot of emotional up and downs. But I trusted Brian, but I'm also pretty much, what you see is what you get with me. And so I pretty much was very just, I am what I am. And so I think Brian kind of got that. But it is kind of scary because you're a prosecutor, and you got to be a little careful about how you do things and say things.
I will say I sent everybody questions today, and your team was like, oh, he doesn't need to look at those, he'll answer whatever. He said he'll answer whatever, and I thought, wow. I mean, I sent some of the questions thinking I probably should clear these, and everyone was like, I'll answer anything. So everyone here is very open, but.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that openness on the part of John. I mean, I just think the public needs to know this. I mean, this is exactly what the public needs to know, and we don't have nearly the level of transparency in any of this that we should. And so, the Judge George LaMelle, I think that's a great move. I mean, there's a reason we have an open courtroom so the public can come in and see what's going on. This is a core part of our system. And in a digital age, I think cameras have to be kind of a part of that. But there's clearly not enough transparency in CPS, DCFS. There's clearly not enough transparency with Board of Supervisors in LA. There's clearly not, who stonewalled us in the process of making this documentary way too much. It was constantly kind of, they wouldn't give us interviews. Tried to control and manipulate what we were trying to do in all sorts of ways that I think, I just think doesn't serve the public. So these are institutions that are there to serve the public. Mm-hmm. They should be absolutely transparent about what's going on and where the problems are, even if it occasionally doesn't make them look very good.
So just piggybacking on that, if you ever, any of you, get the opportunity to work on the legislative side of child abuse, are there any concrete first steps you would take to affect change to help better support our children and convict the monsters who do hurt them?
Ooh, I'm actually very excited to hear Jonathan's answer to this. I will just say that one of the things that I have found, and it makes this job gravely difficult, is I feel like the legislature, no offense, guys in Sacramento, that they really haven't given these laws much thought. And so you have a low-level felony child abuse charge, and then your next option up from that is a life charge that requires, a paralysis, or coma, or death. And there really isn't very much in between. And so you're charging, head trauma the same charge that you might for a single broken rib. I mean, it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of options. I would love to, at some point, sort of work on that, but I'm very curious as to what Jonathan says. So
I have, in 2015, I passed a law. I did a case of a AYSO soccer coach who molested 15 boys, and after we got convictions on all of them, the judge awarded non-economic restitution damages. The problem was in California, they weren't allowing non-economic restitution damages for people who were sexually abused over a long period of time, which makes no sense. And so I got with my legislature, I wrote a law, and it got passed. And so now, people who are molested, kids, when they ask for restitution through the judge, they can not only get economic damage, they can get non-economic damages, which means pain and suffering. And so they can get that through the court instead of having to get an attorney and going and suing. So I got that passed in 2015. Most recently, I wrote a law that we should be able to charge social workers if they commit gross negligence, and as a result of that, a child is murdered. I've given that to Tom Lackey, who's an assemblyman up in Lancaster, and so I'm very hopeful that that goes through. I know it's really hard in Sacramento right now, and Bethel's right that they don't want to pass any laws that seem to help children when you're prosecuting somebody doing something bad. They just don't want to do it. But I have had good relationships with certain members of the assembly, and I try to write laws and whatnot that help. I could tell you recently, the Board of Supervisors tried to tell the Sheriff's Department that if you're arrested and the crime is $50,000 bail or less, they're just going to give you a ticket and release you. Well, just so you all know, child abuse is $50,000 bail. Domestic violence is $50,000 bail. And so when I hear people who are leaders say, oh, we're going to give a child abuser or a domestic violence person a ticket and release them, where do you think they're going to go back to? That home. And so these are our leaders that I think they, like Bethel said, need to be a little more educated in the type of cases we're handling and the laws we're dealing with. And we're actually fighting for vulnerable victims who, have no place to go. And so they need that type of protection. But, there are certain laws we're trying to pass, and we keep trying to do them. And then you as citizens can do the same thing. You can approach your assembly people or your senators and say, hey, I want a law passed. These are issues happening in West Hollywood, and we think that they're important, and, we want to do something about it. And so I think those things are important, but they are hard because many times, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like Sacramento cares about kids. And the real reason is because they have no lobbyists and they can't vote. Isn't that sad? Most politicians only care about people who can vote or who can give them money, and kids can't do either of those things. And so it tells you if somebody really is a good leader, if they're actually fighting for kids who can't really do anything for them, but they can do something for children.
I look forward to going to Sacramento. I was told very early on that is where I have to go because I wasn't very happy about some of the things I was seeing. So I look forward to that trip, many trips. Joy, do we have questions? Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for turning in questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Is it considered child abuse, whether mental and emotional, if a child is unjustly taken from the safe parent? Good question.
You like kidnapping?
No, do you mean kidnapping or like by CPS, or both?
So it is. So if you take, in the state of California, if you take a child away from the parent who has custody of the child, that is technically kidnapping. You're not allowed to do that. And there will be an investigation. You can't call the police for that. Emotional abuse is abuse. It may not necessarily be a crime, but it can be reported to DCFS. There is misdemeanor child abuse, which can be charged on certain types of cases and whatnot if they go through an investigation. But yeah, if a child is illegally taken from a parent who has custody of that child, that's a crime. You're not allowed to do that. You used to be able to do that, but you can't do that anymore. And so that needs to be reported to the police. And then our office, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, has a unit that deals with those type of cases when it comes to custody and whatnot. Emotional abuse is also abuse. And the Department of Children and Family Services is supposed to get involved in that, even though it may not necessarily be a crime.
Okay. Where are the checks and balances when it comes to the detectives, minor counsel, judges, et cetera, that the reports aren't falsified, that thorough investigations are conducted?
I've had a couple of cases where, I want to be diplomatic when I say this, where I've read social workers' reports and then later seen footage, body-worn camera of the incident they were reporting on and didn't necessarily think that the report matched what I was watching. And in my experience, the teams that I work with, and I work with every agency, law enforcement agency in Orange County, but everybody is ready to go after somebody who puts themselves before a child. And so there have been times where CPS has been investigated. There have been times when criminal reports have been looked into and made. I will say, by and large, almost everybody I work with, and I want to say everybody, I just don't want to put a blanket statement on it, but I haven't necessarily worked with somebody that I did not believe. The detectives that I work with are 2 feet in on this. The doctors that I work with are 2 feet in on this. But certainly, I think when we get reports in and we're looking through all of the data and we're looking through those earlier CPS reports, school reports, we get school records. I mean, we are turning over every single stone, and in that, we are looking for discrepancies because we want to make sure that the people who are watching these children are doing it the right way. And we do find those discrepancies sometimes. And like I said, when we do, we absolutely shine the light on those and go after them in whatever system that ends up being.
So intentional false reports, that would be a crime. And so if social workers are making intentional false reports, the checks and balances for the social workers is the Board of Supervisors. So they're in charge of the Department of Children and Family Services. So you'd file a complaint with your supervisor. The DA's office is the check and balance for the police department if they're filing false reports, because if a police officer files false reports, that's also a crime. We got to make sure that's handled. And so when DAs get cases, like Bethel said, we have to look at those reports. We have to look at body camera footage. We have to make sure that they're telling the truth and that these are accurate, because people do lie, right? We're all humans. So there are people who make false reports. And so, like I was saying, we can't file every case because sometimes we can't prove, we don't know what exactly happened. One party says this happened, another party said that happened. In the criminal justice system, that isn't a filing. Our filings are beyond a reasonable doubt, which means almost everybody's saying it happened versus, 50-50. A 50-50 is not a criminal filing. So we have to look at all those different things. We do that. So we pull all the DCFS reports. We pull all the police reports. Like Brian could say, in the Gabriel case, I ended up finding out that the police did this whole investigation and didn't tell me about it. So it's my check and balance to go get it, to get that information. And if they don't give it to me, then I get the judge to help me do it. So we try to do all those different things. And so I agree, sometimes it's frustrating because a parent gets blamed for something and they didn't do it. And then all these people are filing stuff. And so, but we do have checks and balances. I think sometimes people can feel like the whole system is kind of against them, but it's not. People are doing the best they can to make sure that these things are accurate.
And this, correct me if I'm wrong, but that came into the Gabriel case with the social workers. Falsifying records was the primary, right? Was one of the primary.
Thank you.
Reasons they were facing trial. Yeah.
And Brian's right. That was what social workers were doing. They were basically falsifying records. I think it had a lot to do with the injuries to Gabriel and, if they saw them and if he was treated medically.
And whether they even showed up on certain days.
Right.
Lying about going out and that kind of thing.
Right. Horrendous. The Gabriel case is horrendous. I don't think there's anybody I know of that doesn't think that the social workers should have been prosecuted. The problem is the state of California says we can't do it. We don't have a law right now that allows us to do it.
I want to get to all of these, but I don't know if we can. What can we do to help pass laws, foster? I think help be a stronger voice. I think the answer is yes, yes, yes. Definitely sign up to foster, do everything you can, learn about it. And foster parents to me are just angels. Sarah Jane Morris Brower. And also, one thing I just want to point out to help, and I know some of the questions I'm getting are obviously people that are going through something like this or have been through something like this, and I feel your pain. And I want to really point out Marcy's Law, because Marcy's Law is such, people do not know about it until you go through it, and Marcy's Law can help you so much. Please correct me if I say this incorrectly, you guys. Marcy's Law really allows their victims and their families to be involved, and it was actually created because of a victim's family essentially being stalked after a criminal was let out of jail after raping and murdering their daughter. And he showed up at a grocery store and basically tormented them, and nobody told them that he was getting out of prison. So I hope that's right. But what it allows us to do as victims and victims' families is stand up in court. You have the right to show up to every hearing. You have the right to stand up in court. Even when the bail is being decided upon, you have a right to speak, which, I didn't know about that early on, and I wish I'd known that. you are able to stand up and do that. And then if they revisit bail at a different date, you're able to go again. You're also able to go to the parole hearings, and you have a lot to say about that. Marcy's Law to me is gold. If people don't know about that, it's the first thing I tell them, like in terms of what the rights you have. So get to know that. And then also show up to every hearing. Like even when your DA tells you not to, or your victim's advocate tells you not to, oh, you don't need to be there. You need to be there. Like you have no reason not to be there. So if you can do anything or have somebody representing your family there, that is the biggest thing, I know I'm learning through this, and I'm sure you guys have seen, is that if you can be in court and have a presence for your victim or the family be there, then it's gonna be really helpful. So yeah, I hope that helps answer that. Gosh, these are such good questions too. Wow. Okay, let me see. I'm gonna have to pick one more, I think. I'm sorry. Oh, well, someone asked, would you consider filming a documentary for the Anthony Avalos case?
We thought about it quite a bit, and we were filming the early part of that.
Oh,
case.
really?
Yeah, but yeah, we didn't continue with it. That's all. But it was,
And you're working on a project, right? You just wrapped a project that you
yeah.
maybe can do?
when you asked
Maybe.
me that, I wasn't sure if I mean. I guess this will be the first public announcement of it. I'm doing a film about the Boy Scouts, abuse in the Boy Scouts. So, so for people that don't know, this is, Boy Scouts declared bankruptcy about 3.5 years ago, and claimants were asked to come forward, people that had been abused in scouting in some way with volunteers or with scoutmasters or within the scouting organization. And, people weren't sure how many people would come forward. And some people were being very provocative and saying 30, 40,000 people might come forward. Well, 82,000 people came forward. Makes it one of the biggest sex abuse scandal in history that we know of, more than the Catholic Church and other sort of stories you've heard about. So we're telling the story of that. We're interviewing victims, survivors of that. And going through just exactly what happened with the Boy Scouts.
I can't imagine the amount of footage you have for that, if you have, all of that to delve through.
Yeah,
and
it's
edit.
quite a bit. Yeah, it's a feature film. It's coming out on Netflix in about 2 months or so. Yeah.
Did you say the name? Did you say it? Just look for it. Just look for it.
It's going to be called Scouts Honor. Yeah. Is this streaming live, by the way?
It is live streaming.
It's out there.
It's out there.
There was the public announcement. No, it's a pretty egregious case. And the Boy Scouts, the Boy Scouts started around 1908, and there's a very kind of unique part of it. As an organization, they tracked this abuse over time. They had these files that they called the ineligible volunteer files, which started as a kind of way of protecting people. It actually started as a good thing, I think. But became a kind of list of abuse that happened over time. And talking about an institution failing became a way of them sort of protecting their own institution over kids. And time again, you go through these files, and they told kids not to tell their parents, not to tell police, not to tell anybody, that the Boy Scouts would handle it. And the Boy Scouts often just kind of let the abuser go away. And turn the other cheek, or just didn't deal with it. So it's a pretty egregious case.
Yeah.
It's very, very serious. And
you obviously have a passion for institutional corruption and
institutional
sinning.
Corruption tends to, yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
That
it gets under
comes
my
up as a
skin.
theme with you. I appreciate you working on it. I'm sure we all do, like taking that charge on it. I'm sure it does not always make you the most popular.
There's a content. We managed to get the Boy Scouts General Counsel on camera,
Oh, wow.
and so he answers to some of this stuff.
That's amazing. Okay, well, that's amazing. I'm just going to read the questions, but if you want to stay after and talk to anyone, obviously, if you have a pressing matter, I know I'm willing to stay, or if anybody has a question, or if we can get you in touch with anyone, I'm happy to. But one of the questions is, where is the accountability at the LA County supervisors regarding making sure social workers are able to properly do the job? That's a great question. So I wish we could get into that, but maybe after. Does the presence of medical specialists such as board-certified forensic doctors help prosecution in these cases, and how can we get more? Bethel touched on the fact that victims often have many interactions with the system and abuse leading up to a major instance of abuse. Are changes in state law needed to compel earlier intervention by child abuse agencies? Yes, I think yes is the answer. And then this is, I'm a product of abuse. I suffer from anxiety disorder and depression. It's so difficult to make decisions. What can be done with severe emotional abuse by a mentally ill mother? And then they kind of detail, spanking with yardsticks, and basically it sounds like the blurry line between severe beatings and others. And I mean, that's always an issue, right? Corporal punishment, where's the line between corporal punishment and abuse? I mean, that's a very slippery slope. And I mean, abuse to me is abuse. Like, that's just
People shouldn't hit their children.
Never.
That I know some people don't think that's, they think they should, but you don't walk down the street and just hit a person. So most parents who hit their children, they're angry. That's why you're hitting your child, is because you're angry. It doesn't help, because people shouldn't hit their children.
And you teach the children that.
You do, and so we've evolved, I think, as a society, and we have to move on from that. It doesn't help kids at all. Nobody should be hitting anybody, especially not hitting a child. So parents should not be hitting their children. It's just a bad situation. So I hope people see that. And to help everybody, if you see something, say something. That's number one. Number two, we need more foster parents, so we do need that. Number three, get together with groups, parents of murdered children, mothers of murdered children, and get together and become active. Get on social media. Start talking about how to fight for children, and start talking about how to pass new laws. Talk to your supervisors about getting better social workers, about holding social workers accountable. They're in charge of the Department of Children and Family Services. Know who you're voting for. Make sure you're voting for people who support children and support, things doing with children. These are all very positive things to get involved in, and it's your criminal justice system. It's yours, so you get to frame it the way you want to frame it, and that means you get to be involved in it. And like Brian says, they need to be more transparent. You have so many of these leaders that hide everything. You can't figure out what's going on. So the government's supposed to work for you.
Amen to that. So as we come to a close, I just want to thank you all for your service, and it is service, all of you. I mean, Brian, what you're putting out there is, I wouldn't have met Jonathan if not for your documentary. I wouldn't have gotten to know Gabriel, what felt like an intimate level through the documentary, and I really appreciate it, and thank you both for your service. So I also just want to remind all of you out there that the anger and the justice and the fight belongs in the courtroom and in the legislation. And the babies and the children just need to be bathed in love. Like, I just talked to a foster mom the other day. I have a nonprofit that we just started recently after years of working with families and victims and getting to know fellow victims. And, I said to this foster mom, I said, yes, you can talk about things with your foster child. You want them to feel open, but the biggest thing is just bathe them in love. You cannot love these kids too much, and that's the biggest thing. But I also want to remind you that they're not just victims, and they're not just special needs kids in my son's case, but they're survivors, and they have the most beautiful personalities and passions. They love watching Frozen and listening to You Want to Build a Snowman on repeat. That's my guy. They dance to I Love the Nightlife, yes, the disco song from the 70s, every single night before bed, and like to move their pelvis on the bed because he can't walk or sit or stand. They even do it in their IEP assessment with the school, which is funny. They've never seen that before, they said. They love Ronnie Milsap, the blind country singer. They love fondue, escargot, and any fancy French food that seems way beyond Stanley toddler's taste level or mine. They hate applesauce. They tolerate having their teeth brushed. They love cuddles and love. They love their mama and love giving her those huge open mouth kisses. They are happiest in a hot tub in Palm Springs, and they love to be loved. At least that's my survivor, Waylon. But every single survivor and every single child who was killed by an adult also had those little things that make or made them them. And I think we forget that sometimes when we focus on them just being a victim. So Anthony Avalos gave the best hugs and kisses, and he loved McDonald's and Batman. And he loved playing with his siblings and fishing with his cousins. And sweet Gabriel, he was very loving, and he loved to spend time with his siblings. He loved stuffed animals. and his smile would just light up the room, any room. And if you've seen his picture, you know that. He also loved his Ninja Turtles. I don't see the Ninja Turtle now not thinking about that. They must not be forgotten, and we cannot let them be forgotten. We must let their legacies live on by doing all we can to stop these real-life monsters from killing them and hurting them and permanently damaging our babies. I say with Waylon, he is a forever hurt baby. Could he improve? Oh, I hope so, but he is forever hurt. He will never not be hurt, ever. We've got to not only do better, but we've got to do our best because they are relying on us, and as you said, they don't have lobbyists, they need them. Let's work on that. So thank you to all of you for being here and for your patience and staying, because I know this is a really hard subject and it's hard to listen to and see. And I mean, these pictures and these stories, it's so much. So take good care of yourselves tonight. And I also want to give a very big thank you to the City of West Hollywood and Mayor Pro Tempore John Erickson, my dear friend. The Human Rights Speaker Series, I think that's a beautiful thing West Hollywood does. I think that they're so open to ideas as well, so please bring those their way. The West Hollywood City Council, and also just everyone who worked on this, thank you so much for everything you guys did. Joy and Elos and everybody. I just hope that now, after we have seen some very harsh reality today, and everybody out there who's watching, I hope we can bring our children who have been hurt and the forever hurt ones and the ones who are not living anymore but are angels. I hope that we take them out of the darkness and bring them into the light, because child abuse has to be talked about, and it shouldn't be swept under a rug, and it shouldn't be something dirty you talk about. It happens across the board. It is not just one group. So please share it. Share what you learned today. I would love to hear that everybody's going out there and sharing this with everyone what they learned. And please, sign up to be a foster parent and sign up to mentor kids who've gone through abuse. There's so much to do, and everyone in here can do something. So my one thing is find one thing to do to help these kids and these families. Loving Way Foundation is a great place to lovingwayfoundation.org. We help bring joy into lives of abused children, their families, their foster families, and we're so excited to get going. We're having a little Loving Way stay summer series where we're sending families on respite stays to various trips and places they can just rejuvenate, because that has been everything to Waylon and me. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys. I am so honored you were all here, and I can't imagine a better panel, and I've taken pages of notes today. So thank you guys so much, and thank you. And we have cupcakes outside, Hanson's Cupcakes. We have Loving Way Cupcakes. Also, you have a picnic this Saturday with, tell me everybody, it's Gabriel and Anthony,
Gabriel,
Noah?
Anthony, and Noah's family, and anybody, everybody is invited. I know it's up in Lancaster, so it's kind of far.
We're going.
Yes.
Waylon and I are going.
But this is our third year of doing it, and we try to get all the families together, just to be out there in the park and have a good time. I'm going to be barbecuing. So carne asada, hot dogs and hamburgers.
I'm going just for that.
Yeah. And a lot of families come out, and it's a good time to kind of hang out with one another, and not as a DA or as this or as that, just as people, friends, family, just hanging out and getting together. And so you're all invited. Picnic this Saturday.
Thank you guys so much, and let us know if you have any questions. And if you want to reach anybody on social media, I think everybody's on social media. Please reach out, ask any questions, share your experience with us, because I don't want anyone to feel like they were left out today. Thank you so much.